to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. Today, we're tackling a critical issue impacting businesses worldwide. It's employee disengagement. It's a problem with a staggering cost, and it's something every leader needs to understand. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Nick Smallman. Nick is the founder and CEO of Working Voices, a consultancy and trading provider. And for the past 25 years, he's been advising global blue chip clients on engagement, productivity, and retention. And there's a lot that we need to talk about in terms of worker disengagement. Nick Smallman, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
It is an honor. So let's get started in the very beginning. You wrote a fantastic book, Engaging Teams. We'll talk more about that. What inspired you to write the book and delve so deeply into the topic of employee well-being and disengagement?
Well, I would say I've been doing this about 25 years or so, and I've noticed a lot of changes in the workplace anyway. But since COVID, as we know, you experienced it, the sort of great resignation and the great reflection, all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to find out why this was happening. And I suppose the big takeaway was it was nothing to do with COVID. COVID just kind of exacerbated or threw open the doors, and you could see kind of what was happening. And you'd seen really the American economy, the British economy, the global economy in lots of ways had started to squeeze employees too hard. There are a number of contributory factors. And I wanted to see what we could do to remedy that.
Very, very interesting. And I agree completely. The book is Engaging Teams, How to Use Social Well-Being to Boost Performance, Retention, and Culture. And in the book, Nick, you highlight that the worldwide cost of employee disengagement and lost productivity has reached, and I hope our listeners are sitting, $8.9 trillion a year. Nick, what are some of the major reasons worker disengagement has reached these unprecedented levels?
Well, I think the first thing is a kind of an alarming stat that is pretty consistent over the last few years from Gallup. And it shows that over 75% of employees are disengaged. That's either heavily disengaged, and that's only a small number, but about 55% of employees are kind of moderately disengaged. And that is known as quiet quitting, which I'm sure you've heard of. And the quiet quitting really comes from the fact that capitalism requires organizations to be efficient. And so doing more with less is a mantra. So people feel overloaded. Then, of course, they use technology to push through that doing more with less. And so people feel kind of less autonomy. And so humanity is squeezed out of the workplace. And so what social well-being, my sort of concept, is designed to improve connectivity between people, thus improving the culture.
Very, very interesting. And your book also discusses how work environments that largely stress efficiency while devaluing employee well-being contribute to this problem. Can you elaborate on how current work environments and practices specifically lead to fatigue and burnout?
Of course. I think a lot of it comes down to sort of historic trauma. And what I mean by that, I think the global recession of 2008 was very traumatic, particularly for sort of multinationals. And I think the accountants kind of took over. There was lots of compliance training, and there was lots of caution. And I think that, ultimately all clients are sort of beholden to their shareholders, and it's about shareholder value. And so KPIs and targets and quarterly earnings became the most important thing. And I think the problem with that is it's too short-termist. And actually, if you want long-term success, your people have to be part of that journey. And in order for that to happen, you need a culture that's going to keep people within the business. Because there's lots of choice nowadays. If you don't like where you're working or you don't like your manager, you can move. And of course, social media has added another dimension where people can find out what other people are doing. So it's incumbent on organizations to really understand what makes their employees tick. And that's also multi-generational, because a Gen Z person may have different drivers than a Gen X person.
Interesting. And research reveals that 50% of millennials and 75% of Gen Z workers have left jobs in the past period. And so it's interesting. What makes these generations particularly prone to leaving their jobs? What are their expectations from employers?
There are loads of expectations. Our research found that a very high number of younger employees wanted their organization to have some kind of sort of credible mission. It wasn't just about making money for them. In fact, many of them said they would rather have better well-being and a better company mission than money. So their driver's not money. And I think Gen X people, so people from the 80s and 90s, were more driven by pure financial reward. And our research showed that there'd been a sort of sea change in what mattered to employees of a younger generation.
You discuss the concept in the book of a social contract that employers and employees both must fulfill. Can you describe what the social contract entails and why it's so vital today?
Well, I think you really have to look at what an organization needs to do in order to keep its staff. There are sort of perks that most corporations will employ. I think the average multinational will spend about $11 million a year on well-being initiatives, but the problem is they don't really work. And there's a fascinating piece of research from Oxford University that underlines that point. So in order to really fulfill a social contract, it is about making sure that people feel genuinely part of an organization. And that happens through the way leadership engages with their teams, hence the title of the book. And so that's around how do you set up your teams? So the component parts, the things that seem to really matter were psychological safety, which is a term you hear all the time. And that really just means that people feeling that they can take interpersonal risk, and that when they do take interpersonal risks, they won't be shamed, they'll be sort of acknowledged. And it encourages people to be more connected to what's going on. They also want to feel respected, and they also want to feel some kind of sense of belonging. Because if you don't feel a sense of belonging to where you work, what's keeping you there?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm chatting with Nick Smallman, the co-author of an absolutely fantastic read. It's called Engaging Teams: How to Use Social Wellbeing to Boost Performance, Retention, and Culture. So we're quickly coming to the end of our time together, and I want to focus on some practical tips. Is there something specific that you think HR departments can do that will change the trajectory of a poorly performing company by addressing employee well-being?
Well, the first thing I would say is that culture is what people say it is. And what I mean by that is if senior leadership says that this is the way we want to work, then that gives people permission to act in a certain way. The one thing there are several things I would recommend. Number one, I would encourage people to communicate outside of work talk. I think you can't really connect with your fellow workers if you know nothing about them. And research shows that if you care about your fellow team members, the collective intelligence of the group goes up. And that's something to do with the way humans have historically always socialized. And if you have, for example, if you just work in a silo and you're being relatively sort of self-centered and selfish, you don't do anything to affect the prospects of the people who work with you. So getting team cohesion really matters. And that means that leaders are good at sort of leading people through change. And let's be clear, there's going to be huge amounts of change over the next decade with AI and all kinds of other geopolitical challenges. And it's making sure you set that environment up correctly. And the way you do that is to constantly check in with your team, get to know them, get them to know each other, and create a sense of mission. That should really form the sort of the bedrock of any culture going forward.
Amazing. I want to give the final word to you, Nick. What is the single most important message you hope employers and employees take away from Engaging Teams? And where can people find the book?
You can find the book on Amazon and at the publisher Kogan page. But the thing I think I would leave you with is there's so much potential in every human being. And what we found is how little of that potential is actually being realized in the workplace. And try and see your employees as individuals who collectively, i.e. working together, can create an enormous impression and subsequent benefit for your organization. That's really where the focus should be. Bring the potential out, by helping to boost social connection. It helps your employees to feel better. It boosts their engagement, their productivity, and it most importantly boosts the culture.
Amazing. Nick, thank you so much for this very vitally important conversation. The book is Engaging Teams, How to Use Social Wellbeing to Boost Performance, Retention, and Culture. And of course, you can find that book on Amazon. We'll be right back after a quick break here on Get Down to Business. Don't touch that dial.